Elon confirms a $3,000 price target for Tesla, consistent with what ARK is suggesting, along with execution that they're working on currently to get that done. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. We want to thank our Patreon supporters. If you'd like some good ideas on investing and trading Tesla, especially as we're headed into the end of the quarter when we're going to see some really interesting numbers, I want to encourage you to join us on Patreon. We also do some trade consulting if you'd like some one-on-one lessons on options trading, as well as how to prepare for the next 2 months of activities for Tesla from a maximize your earnings potential zone. We also wanted to note that this is a copyrighted broadcast. Any use of the material presented is prohibited without permission. So as you'll note, 3 days ago, it came out that there was an all-hands meeting by Elon Musk for employees. And the focus of that meeting was to note that there are several points that came out of it. Number one is that he pointed out that this will be the last major push we'll have to do at this level. So as you recall, it hasn't been every quarter, but pretty much every end of quarter for the past 3 years, Elon has either perhaps sent a letter or possibly showed up with his mom to help with deliveries or production or do whatever he could to help meet the target numbers that Tesla might have. So what we've sort of developed a little bit of a process with is the fact that when Elon shows up on the site, they're going to be tight on the number. When Elon writes a letter and says, "You guys are doing a great job. Let's keep trying and we'll get there," that'll be another number or another route. So we've come up with a new process this time on this issue, because usually he waits until a week before the end of the period before he has this sort of conversation or process go on. In this case, he's actually chosen to, a month early before the end of the quarter, encourage everyone to push as hard as possible to get the numbers that are being pushed out to an optimized level. So I have to say that I heard this and I was like, wow, good idea. I didn't want to actually say anything about it almost. I saw several pieces come out about it, but I was reluctant to say anything for one main reason, which is the smaller your channel is, what you have to say has to be smarter. Otherwise, you don't get any viewers by saying the same stuff that everybody else says. And I was working to understand better what angles represent an intelligent conversation about the situation. And the main reason is that, as you all know, and we've discussed before, Tesla has been running overtime for employees in China, Fremont, etc., for the last 6 months. So the question I was asking is, wait, if you're already running overtime and everybody's working as hard as possible, you blew away the number last quarter and we're going to have better numbers for this quarter. We kind of already know that. Where exactly are you going to get more production from to support the goal that Elon has to push even harder? And so I kind of surveyed a few friends that are Tesla affiliated and came up with a couple of items I thought were interesting. Number one is that typically Tesla runs on 12-hour shifts. That's trucks, that's individuals. They're going 24 hours a day, at least in Fremont. And what happens is that you have 4 days of 12 hours, and then you get your time off and you come back. Well, now Elon and Tesla have sort of pushed it to a new level. And that is that truck drivers are allowed on the road a maximum of 14 hours a day for your Class A license. So Tesla can pick up more hours without violating if they want to enlist sort of more trucker hours to get more vehicles delivered. Another note is that the usual 12-hour shift that's the norm times 4 days, and then running that on a 7-day-a-week schedule has been shifted to now what's available is up to 16 hours if the workers want to do that. And so it's my belief that what's going on right now is potentially we see the money is there to pay the overtime, either time and a half or double time, if the folks in different positions want to pour in more hours for this last push, if you will. The next issue is, well, why is this the last push, and why is Elon promising this will be the last push of this sort that they'll have to do going forward? Answer: the opening of Berlin and the opening of the factory in Austin allows them to now have, for example, you already know the schedule. The schedule for Elon and Tesla is the first month and a half of production each quarter is actually being shipped to Europe. The reason is that it turns out that the on-the-water time and delivery times have to be added to whatever production you do. So, for example, if you chose to produce and ship cars to Europe, it's 3 weeks on the water, I believe, and then you have get to a customer before it gets to the customer. If you do those shipments at the beginning of the quarter, you now have plenty of time for it to be on the water, and if there are any delays in the shipping process, they now arrive and can be sold. So we're in great shape. So basically, what's kind of happening then is, for example, with Model Ys, you don't have to ship them from China or from Fremont if they're already being produced in Berlin. And so I think he's anticipating that facility, if it's not October 1, it'll be latter October. And then you'll have the production needed for that space without having to ship it from a long way out. Better price better cost because you no longer have, tariffs for vehicles produced outside the EU. And then, obviously easier delivery, less costly delivery, being closer to your customers, and the goodwill that goes with having a factory in Germany / in the EU. So we're sort of rolling along this narrative of the fact that the new production reduces the stress on the existing production. So I think all of this is good. It's great that he's making this announcement. The fact that you're seeing increased production at more productive facilities, i.e. more gigapress usage, etc., I think we're just going to see some spectacular numbers. And as you may recall, what we've discussed is there are two measurements or metrics for how a company is doing and will do when it comes to the stock. Number one, how much production have you done, and what are the numbers for the current quarter? Number two, what's the forecast, both production and revenue, for the coming quarter, and plural quarters. So basically, there are a bunch of companies, for example, Apple this quarter, that came out with great numbers, but pointed out the chip shortage was going to mess up their ability to get the growth and delivery of numbers of phones. And so therefore their stock price sort of went negative slightly, but has remained somewhat neutral. And they'll delay sales. They don't lose any sales of people not buying from them. They'll just hang on to their old phones longer. So it's kind of no big deal that Apple hit that situation. Now, in the case of Tesla, obviously they have competitors, but the chip shortage is creating other issues that one has to think about. So the question that comes up is, where's the 3,000 price? As I said, Kathie Woods at ARC indicated that her target for Tesla was a 3,000 target. And the basis of that was partially what's happening with full self-driving, but mostly what's happening with production at the 5 to 10 million units per year for 2025 as a target. And so how likely how is that going to work? There are a couple of interesting points to be noted about this. The first one is that Fremont, for this year after everything's done, is going to start being a 1 million vehicles a year, but particularly targeting the higher value vehicles like plaids, etc. And so if you add up some simple numbers, 1 million vehicles, let's say by this time next year, coming out of Fremont, then we go to 2 million vehicle capability in both Berlin as well as Austin. That's 5 million vehicles. So what's the exact date for this? I think it's a year before you can ramp fully to this after you open. Is it a year and a half? Entirely possible. So therefore, we're adding up 3 million vehicles between those two facilities, and now we go to China. Now that's the question, is what's happening in China. It's our belief that China will do 1 million vehicles this year, or very close to it, easily eclipsing almost by itself the numbers that were forecasted for the whole company for this year. Might it be 700K? That's all good, because when you're doing 500,000 vehicles from Fremont, you're still above 1 million vehicles for this calendar year. The next question that pops up is, what is going to happen in China? As we've shared in other shows, the Chinese goal is for Tesla to sell into the Chinese market 5 million vehicles by 2025. How do we come up with this number? If you take 28 million vehicles that they'll sell in 2025 in China, and if 20% of those are EVs, which is what their goal is, and Tesla maintains its current market share, or even it dips a little bit, it works out to, call it 7 million vehicles perhaps. Tesla gets 4 million, 5 million vehicles of that. So if we add up 5 million vehicles from China plus 5 million vehicles from the other production facilities we currently know about from Tesla, number 10 million vehicles by 2025. And so if Tesla sells all those vehicles, and we think they will, you now have an interesting outcome. There's one other number that is going to be discussed heavily as we exit this quarter, and that is per vehicle revenue. So what happened in this past quarter was that the number of vehicles coming out of China has risen, but they're also delivering at the lowest price point to sell in China, and as they move those vehicles around the world. What's unique that happened here is that we expected it. Last year, average vehicle price for Tesla or sell for revenue purposes was $57,000 per vehicle. We forecasted that that number would drop to approximately 55,000, only because the number of vehicles in China is rising. When we did the math, which is to divide 12 billion by 200,000 vehicles, 201,000 vehicles, that number worked out to 60,000 per vehicle. And so the mystery that popped up was, how can your average sell price per vehicle be declining, but based on the number of vehicles being sold in and from China, but when you add up all the numbers, the actual number jumped to 60,000 per vehicle in terms of how those numbers worked out. The answer is what they're doing in the energy business. That's megapacks, that's power walls, etc. So we're in an interesting circumstance now, because what we're heading into is that whole energy business is growing, and that's terrific. Now, I believe that this quarter might be kind of rough, because it did come out during the trial last month from Elon that they have 80,000 power walls that have been ordered for the quarter, but they're only likely to deliver 30,000 of them. And the reason is that they're repurposing the chips from the power walls back into cars, and to some extent that's happening with the megapacks as well. So this might be a play around that's worth it, because they generate more revenue per vehicle than they do for those other things, plus they can repurpose those chips. So it may be a slight issue, not a huge one, for Tesla to be able to deliver some terrific numbers unexpected by Wall Street. So what we were looking to cover today is just the fact that, yes, the 3,000, Elon has indicated that if they execute the 3,000 price target is valid based on how many vehicles Tesla will be able to sell when it comes to 2025. The one other note that sort of jumped out, and Kathie Woods pointed this out, is that if you look at Tesla's market share, in theory, as new customers have come into the EV space or new vendors have come to the EV space, the thought process was that the market is growing and Tesla would get a shrinking share of a larger market. What's actually happened is somewhat the opposite. The market is growing and Tesla is actually retaining its market share for a larger growing market. And I think part of this is the fact that there are a lot of people that have introduced new vehicles, et cetera, but the chip shortage is affecting the ability of competitors to deliver new vehicles, especially because the EVs actually demand more chips than the regular ICE vehicles do, number one. And number two, the profit margin in terms of what those companies will do with the chips they have is to target them to their most valuable vehicles, which are likely to be very large vehicles that are high polluting, and therefore cut back supplies of the cheaper ones that are out there. So I think it presents a very interesting picture, and I think that the only problem here is that when you're thinking in terms of a year or two out, it does have an impact on the stock because large investors will buy and hold, but it kind of sucks because in the short term, having conversations about 2025 doesn't do much for the stock, even if you see the fundamentals going in place to deliver it. So I really think we're in the era now for Tesla where the options and so forth that would normally be terrifically profitable in the short term will likely end up winding out into longer terms of execution, and therefore buying leaps or things that give you more time for this to play out. I think it's a smart move if you want to make some good money. So I think there's a ton of really good news for Tesla here. I'm happy to see the stock price stabilizing at higher levels into the 730 plus area. And I'm kind of expecting our usual, pop up on Monday, slide sideways or down by Friday routine until we actually see, some substantive things coming on like new production, et cetera. So I wanted to close out here. Reminder, please take time to like and subscribe. We have some Patreon shows. We do some consulting if you're interested in some help with your structuring yourself in that, better as we head into this very, very important period for Tesla. Also wanted to note we do have a few SpaceX shares. If there's interest in that, just drop us a private message on our Teslafaninsight on Facebook, and we can email you back and establish a dialogue there. Any rate, I wanted to next get into our health tips. We introduced the health tips at maybe a year and a half, two ago. And what happened was I had a chance to interview about 200 doctors with different specialties. And usually when I put it at the end of the show, I try to be quick and brief and run it through so that I don't offend. But typically, after we finish our Tesla discussion and introduce the idea we're in our health section, the goal is to note to you that it's sort of a free playground for myself and our regular viewers of covering things that most people don't cover as they're talking about cars. But I work out every day, and I think that as we age, by managing the health stuff ourselves, we're just more healthy. So you'll notice below that we've actually listed some health tips, and I kind of go through them systematically. So one of the interesting things that happen, and I may, as we go through the next few shows, just take time to explain further where we got our information. So today's show I wanted to focus on is we actually, I was living in the DC area primarily, and we had a chance to interact with a number of doctors who are interfacing with the NIH. So I had an occasion to spend some time with a doctor who's both a practicing physician and a professor at the University of Louisville, and he specializes in what's called upper respiratory cancer. So what he shared with me was, he said, one of the problems in our current society is that there are a lot of people who are really busy. So as a result, they tend to like to eat and then jump into bed immediately. The problem with this is it creates a number of issues. Number one, what starts to happen is if you do that a lot, as you're laying in your bed, the stomach bile will actually roll into your upper respiratory and cause cancer. The other thing that he pointed out was that when you think of over-the-counter remedies, a lot of people feel like they're fully sort of healed by having done that. But what it does is it masks the symptoms. It doesn't address the damage that's being done. So I wanted to note, so after those 2 pointers, what he further pointed out was that minimum, you don't want to go to bed within 2 hours of having eaten. And ideally, it's best to make it 4 hours. That way, all that food has been digested and you don't end up with it being a problem. I also wanted to note for our whole list, I actually, each of those people were doctors like our friends from the University of Louisville that sort of ran through what their recommendations were, which is how we created our list. And so what I also did was I had my med school exam because I had a chance to meet the former head of Georgetown Hospital. And before telling me he was a doctor, I was wanting to ask him about the list that I've been given. So I actually have a list of 10 things to consider. And I went through each of them based on the specialty of the doctors. And he said, hey, that's a good list and that's valid. So if you don't like our tips, take them to your doctor and quiz them about what they think of that list as you go through your general health. And then if you are a doctor, we like to add new things to our list because we want our viewers to be healthier. So a note here is that after every show now, we are going to start including some of the nature video I've been shooting because there's something called forest bathing that I learned about from one of our viewers and read about it and started introducing it. So what you'll notice is the B-roll we use in terms of over my shoulder. Part of it will be Tesla stuff, but also I have a lot of video of nature, particularly water in there. After our shows, we've started to include 5 or so minutes worth of ocean sound and video. And I wanted to encourage you to take some time to close your eyes, take a few deep breaths and enjoy, what that's about, because our bodies are 80% water. And I think we have a special relationship with water that we don't have with other sort of things. All of nature we're part of, but I just think water in particular has a big impact on us that other things don't. So I wanted to encourage you to embrace the challenge of sticking around, and we'll avoid putting ads in there so you guys can get a nice blast of forest bathing, but in the form of some of the ocean and other videos that we've put in. And then, again, if you have suggestions of things we should consider in this regard, I'm happy to consider it. At any rate, this is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. Tschüss, German, au revoir, French, shalom, Hebrew, Khoda Hafiz, Farsi, Zdravstvuyte, Russian, Ni Hao Ma, Chinese, Namaste, Hindi, Arrivederci, Italian, Hey Do, our friends in Sweden, Good Day, our friends in Australia, and in Jamaica, we say enough respect, walk good man. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day, and bye for now. And let's go Tesla 3,000 times.